So for this video, I'll be going over what I learned on trying to go over the Ruby on Rails curriculum on the Odin Project, like just some random tidbits that I want to remember for myself. So for getting started with Rails, or like just getting an overview on how Rails works, I keep on going back to the Get Started with Rails blog post on the Rails guides. I recommend to go over it because it goes over the basics of CRUD actions, using the model view controller, and making a basic blog app that adds stuff to the database. For Rails routes, they could be a URL followed by a controller action. There's defaults to add RESTful routes with the addition of resources and resource, which could do all the actions that are required for RESTful controller actions, such as index, show, edit, create, new, update. Also, routes, you could also make a default route with root to or root. And for another thing about resources which I like is it makes sure that the dash path or dash URL associated with it. I recommend going to the Rails guides controllers section where it shows you the exact list of the dash path, because you could have new photos dash paths or photo path, which will send you to the index action. And for RESTful routes, if you try using link twos, you could use link twos to do the different actions inside of a website. If you're doing that and you try doing other actions other than if you try doing create or delete, I recommend you try using turbo action and putting it inside there.
For Rails controllers, I would recommend looking at the Rails guides, but one thing which I think is important to note is the difference between render and redirect to. Redirect to makes a new HTTP request after rest of controller action code is done and does not keep instance variables, while render uses a view file and keeps the instance variables. Another thing to note is that every instance variable defined in the action controller can be used in the view if it was defined.
For the first thing I learned in Rails was the views and layout. So the views and layout are kind of familiar if you already know HTML, which I assume you already do know if you're trying to use Rails. So in Rails, there's the views file, which could be an html.erb file, which you could put in just HTML file, which we could put Ruby code in and also have like Rails tags. Well, that's around it. The layouts are inside the views. So for each different view, it's inside of a different layout, but it's usually in the application layout. And the application layout is shared between all the different routes in Rails, all the different views. So the views are inside the layouts. So I recommend using layouts to hold stuff that are going to be across your entire website, like the nav bar or like the flash and error messages. That's around it. Yeah, originally I thought the layouts were useless, but they're really useful. Don't just see the layouts as a useless place where you just put in the yield and then put in the view. Put in reusable stuff, the stuff you want to repeat across different web pages in your layout file. For controllers, I also recommend looking at the Rails guides for the initial setup. But for the CRUD actions, I recommend you go to the setting up the blog post, and it'll show you the different create, update, destroy. It shows you the index, show, new, edit, delete. Those actions are probably the things you have to do in the controller. So essentially in the controller, you could add your instance, make an instance variable where you can make a model with it. And the model could be associated with model could be used to make a new form or create a new form or do index. The model is a way for us to access data from the database in an organized way. That's what I enjoy. You don't have to search up everything's all organized for you. It's really not that hard to do. And the difference between render and redirect to makes a new HTTP request and deletes all the variables you had initially with the instance variables, while the render keeps it, but renders just changes it to look like another request. Redirect to, you could send the variables along with it with locals. And for this, I recommend, yeah, for every instance variable, it's going to be put in. So you could do like at blog equals blog.new, and then you could also have another variable with at user equals user.new, and then you could like make a form for user and blog, or you can make like nested forms and stuff with controllers. So, but in general, you just need to reference the models you're using inside the controller and the view you're using with render or render to, redirect to. So active record associations, it's literally mostly just going over the relationships between the different objects, like has many, belongs to, has one. So the unique ones I want to go over, which kind of got me off, are like when you try adding foreign keys to the migrations. For what I noticed, you literally just add belongs to in the migration tab when you're trying to implement it. For the models, it's more like the migrations, like putting it in the migration, like putting the foreign key to link the two is kind of a little harder. And also when you try doing a many-to-many relationship, there's multiple ways. Like there's a has and belongs to many, which I haven't really used much. I use the many-to-many using a third table in between. When you do that, make sure to use through. If you don't do that, it'll break. And for associations, you could do like, you could rename models to like be like another thing. Like for example, positions could also be like, you can make, maybe for example, you can make a user be both user and friend. So you can make a user be associated to another user with active model association. You can see more details in the Rails guides. The small thing I wanted to go for the form with is how you can bind it to a model, but also it's optional. You don't have to bind it to a model. You can do the URL in the method to make a search form, and you can see on the Rails guide, the first section actually, while it doesn't bind to a model, it shows you an example how to do a search form, while the lighter half shows you a way to create a user model.
Turbo frames allow for only part of the HTML page to change. They can also be lazy loaded to add the loading effect. Turbo Stream allows for the website to update when new data is added to database. Just follow Turbo in Rails guides.
Stimulus, you add controllers, data actions, targets, classes with stimulus. And then you write stimulus code for this respective JavaScript file inside the JavaScript, and then you go to the controllers. So controllers can be used to toggle classes, add or delete elements on the page. So you can do that by using targets. So targets can be used to modify the DOM. So if you know how to modify the DOM with normal JavaScript, you could just make it, you could like use stimulus to use targets to dynamically modify the Rails page with controllers. I think that the controllers on stimulus and everything else could be used to just make it a lot more easier to understand what you're doing with JavaScript. You could do the exact same things, like you could access the action methods that are being called with data actions, like click, so you could tell if it's getting clicked, the page is getting clicked, and then you could run code that affects the target or the classes to toggle it on or off. Or you could even use template files in order to add entirely new elements to the page. So it's pretty interesting. So thank you for watching. I don't really have the best knowledge of Rails despite going over like the Odin Project curriculum. Like I only knew enough to like be able to look at the documentation and complete the projects. And that was pretty much the struggle the entire way through. I'm on the Rails final project. I went over the mails and like WebSocket, and the JS and CS bundling, but I don't feel like I have even a worse understanding of those two concepts than I do have of the general concepts I explained in this video. For this video, it wasn't intended to explain the topics, but more for like talking about like the guides that I use to go over it, or for like the missing gaps that I keep on forgetting. Like I don't want to forget many to many. I don't want to forget to do a through, or like maybe I should put in aliases here.